GST action right now coming in from Chandigarh. Today was the first day of the 47th meet of the GST Council. It saw several key outcomes emerge. The Council accepted an interim report of the group of ministers on rate rationalization. ET now has also learned that the Council decided to expand the scope of the composition scheme. Also, that both central and state officers will now be allowed to send notices to taxpayers. Meanwhile, state governments have asked for the continuation of the GST compensation beyond 30th June. The states are hopeful of a positive response on their request. The GOM has also recommended taxing hospital rooms, post officer services, etc. What's more, according to our sources, the Council has approved exemptions for filing claim to get refund during COVID period, that is from March 2020 to Feb 2022. Let's listen in to this ground report from Team ET now, right now at the site of the meet.
Yes, the first day of the GST Council meeting is finally over, and what the sources are telling us that most of the agenda items have been already approved today. I have my colleague Prakash over here. Prakash, there were some suggestions made on the rates by the fitment committee. What has the council decided?
Yes, I must say it was action-packed GST Council meeting after 6 months, and a lot of decisions have been taken by the council. And the first one is with regard to the recommendation that has been made by the fitment committee, as you have mentioned. The sources have informed that the GST Council has decided to accept this recommendation. As per the recommendation, the council has decided to increase GST on Tetra Pak from 12% to 18%. As far as the GST on ropeway travel is concerned, the council has decided to reduce it to 5% from existing 18%. The GST on sewage treated water is concerned, the council has decided to put into nil bracket of GST slab from existing 18%. Council has also given some clarification with regard to the GST on electric vehicle with battery or without battery, and there was a clarification that in both the cases the GST will be levied at 5%. As far as the GST on orthopedic implants are concerned, the council has decided to put into 5% GST slab. But one important agenda was there that was related to the GOM report on rate rationalization. We have been informed by our sources that the council has accepted this recommendation also. So I would like to request you to please explain what has happened in the GST Council meeting.
Yeah, so the GST Council has today accepted this GM report on rate rationalization. Now, what the Council has decided, they have corrected the inverted duty structure on number of items like LED lamps and solar water heaters. They have increased the rates, so that will become costlier going forward. Also, on the labeled and packed items like that were earlier exempt, meat, lassi, they all will be having a nominal GST rate of 5% going forward. Also, what the sources are telling us that they have also withdrawn certain exemptions. So the hotels which were having rupees 1,000 below rates, they will all be having a GST rate now. So that will also become costlier. So that is a detailed agenda report that was discussed and accepted today. The notification will be issued in 15 days of time, and then it will become implemented. Now, coming to your sources, I wanted to ask you, there was a demand of setting up of GST tribunals. What is the decision taken?
Yes, the council has decided to constitute a GST tribunal in line with the income tax tribunal. The motive behind this idea is to form a separate tribunal where the GST related disputes will be discussed, and there will be fast resolution. As of now, what is happening is the disputes related to GST is going to the high courts, and it is taking long time and impacting the compliance related issues. So council has decided to form a GST tribunal. And along with that, because there is another meeting that is happening tomorrow, the last day of GST Council meeting. So what are the agenda that is going to be taken by the GST Council tomorrow?
Yeah, so since most of the agenda items are already done away with, the major agenda that is remaining is the GM report on the online gaming, that the sources are telling us that 28% is the rate that they have suggested. So that will be the major decision for looking forward to. Apart from that, the states demand to extend GST compensation for 5 years. That will definitely the states will be pushing for. So we have some major items for tomorrow as well, so that we'll have to wait and watch out for.
And my colleague Meghna Mittal also caught up with the Kerala Finance Minister K.N. Balagopal earlier today before the meet. Let's listen in to what he said.
After a very long time, the GST Council meeting is being held. What is your major expectations from this meeting?
GST Council will discuss about the various aspects of the GST implementation. And one major thing we are concerned, and many other states concerned, I think, is the compensation period. The compensation period is going to end by 30th. We have to further expand the date of compensation. This is one of the major things, because there is a sharp decline in the actual real income of the states compared to the pre-GST period. So when GST came, if the states are affected that much and if you are losing, that is to be corrected. And proper, genuine income should be levied and system should be upgraded like that.
Sir, also on the 5 years of GST, now it's finally being completed. How do you see the journey of the cooperative federalism?
Cooperative federalism is very much affected. That is what the feeling. And even the Honorable Supreme Court said about that. Cooperative federalism means it's a cooperation between the center and state. And Supreme Court verdict on the issue is a very clear pointer on the issue which we states raised earlier. So it should not be in the interest of a particular party to this. So that is what we are raising. And I was in the Rajya Sabha Select Committee on this GST Council. I wrote a dissent note at that time itself, showing these are the problems. And what we apprehended at that time, it came as a fact. And now Supreme Court has also said that these problems are there.
All right, to speak more about why this GST meet actually matters, and remember the final outcome will be tomorrow, so this is a bit of a precursor to what we can expect. Some of the other issues that will be discussed is what will be the tax on gaming, will there be any decision on further taxes on crypto, etc. But let's keep the focus on the big headline parts of the announcements which we can expect. Abhishek, Rastogi, partner Khaitan and company joining us for this. Najib Shah, former chairman CBEC, also on the show. Mr. Shah, let me begin on the demand of states to extend the 5-year compensation beyond the 30th of this month. Now, this was done initially for a period of 5 years, and I'm taking a second for a quick recap for our viewers. This was a compensation to be given to state governments on the basis of which, on the condition of which they agreed to join the GST Council, and GST law could actually be passed because the state said that we need a compensation amount at least for the first 5 years because of all the revenue loss we will bear. They've now asked for an extension. I want to start by getting you to explain to us what that means, because in India we're famous for extending deadlines, and once the whole extension business starts, it never really ends. So right now the states will say that, you know, we need another few years because we had COVID. At the end of those few years, 2, 3, whatever, there may be other circumstances. And are we going to be stuck with this as a regular feature?
I hope not, because clearly what the constitutional amendment and the law suggested was this was for a transitionary period, which was defined to be 5 years, starting from the day when the GST itself was implemented. So the 5 years period comes to an end in the next 2 days. And the cess was supposed to be collected and used to compensate the states for possible loss arising out of the implementation of GST on a base of 2015-16 and an assumed growth rate of 14%. This is critical because no state was really growing at 14% at any point of time. So the average growth rate was more towards 8 to 9%. But the government at that point of time agreed. And yes, this was definitely a requirement at that point of time because everybody was stepping into the unknown and they required some guarantee and assurance, which the government of India stepped in and gave that guarantee and assurance. Now, the 5-year period coming to an end, the question is, how long do we continue? Do we continue? You must remember again that the collection of the cess itself to finance the back-to-back loans has been extended till 2026. So in case, assuming that the GST Council decides to recommend an extension of the cess, given the COVID, given the headwinds which we are now facing, I would expect that there would be a bargaining on the rate of 14% itself, which is an unrealistic rate. It should be a more realistic rate towards 9-10% if at all, and it should be for a shorter period. But what will this mean? Will this mean that beyond 2026, when cess in any which case is to be collected to finance the back-to-back loans, will it mean a further period of 2 years of collection of cess? or compensating the loss because of the implementation of GST. These are things which clarity we will get to know tomorrow when the final outcomes are known to all of us.
You know, I think we need to take a second to also relate this to how it impacts all of us. And Abhishek, I'm going to task you with that, because when we say this cess is going to be collected till 2026, just to make up for the COVID hole, and I'm putting it very simply, what does this mean for all of us? Because the cess is collected on certain items which are called sin items, but even if you're not generally a quote-unquote sinner, you're going to be impacted one way or the other, isn't it?
Amanda, you are very right. Actually, the burden of this cess will ultimately go on to the industry and will be passed on to the ultimate consumer. That goes without saying. Now, interestingly, if you analyze that 14% compounded annual growth rate was promised for 5 years. Now, assuming that there was no GST and there would have been COVID, because, COVID was unforeseen circumstance. In that situation, in any case, the growth rate for the states would have been much lesser. Now, today, the states are being compensated for the agreed period, for the agreed rate. And I think when most of this pandemic period has passed, and this difficult phase has passed, and they have been compensated for that period as well, I feel that any further extension will just damage certain sectors, will result in additional costs to the ultimate consumer. We know for a fact that today the inflation is growing, and some of these items may be sin items, but most of these sectors would be related sectors. It is not just a particular sector on this. There will be compensation cess. There will be a lot of ancillary and incidental sectors related to these sectors. So all of that gets affected in some way or the other. So I think, and when do we end? I think you raised the fundamental question that if it gets extended today, will it be extended for 1 year, 2 years, and what will be the situation at that point of time? So I think when we talk about cooperative federalism, when we talk about that these states came on board for GST implementation during the COVID period, and otherwise they have got the benefit at the compounded annual growth rate of 14%. In case there is a loss which has been incurred, that has been made good. So I don't see a very bright reason for this to be extended now, because ultimately the burden will be on industry and consumers.
I think one of the big headlines to focus on is definitely compensation scheme. And the fact is, and Abhishek, just to follow up to you on this, that there seems to be no big division over here. BJP ruled states and opposition ruled states are all going to be very happy to pass it on. You talked about how it's going to come to the end consumer. Can you refine this a little further? What items, and do you think they could look at an expansion of what items now attract the cess?
See, I think there is a report on rate rationalization also. So any cess or any tax which does not go to the credit chain leads to tax cascading. Now, today, if we are talking about rate rationalization, if we want to trim down the exemption list, we want to expand the tax base, we must also think of moderating the tax rate. Now, these compensation cesses are basically leading to tax cascading. These may be on certain specified items today, you may call it sin goods, etc. But that must ultimately go because it does not form part of the credit chain. Now, you may trim down certain exemptions to ensure that the revenue of these states is enhanced, and hence there is no need for compensation. You may trim down those exemptions, enhance the rates, do rate rationalization between 12 and 18%. That is still understandable. But this compensation cess, which is non-creditable, leads to tax cascading in a very, very certain way, and hence must be avoided at this stage, because ultimately it's an exception. All of these cesses are an exception. They must be implemented only in exceptional situations. Now, this implementation into GST has happened. Today, we are completing 5 years of GST. We have a robust tax compliance and collections mechanism. So I think after 4 years of GST, this burden on industry and onto the ultimate consumer is not what we are looking for. So I think keeping that in mind, the decision must be taken to pragmatically include certain sectors. For instance, we have been talking about oil and gas sector. You need to include that. The GST Council has to take a decision on that inclusion of these sectors into GST. Ensure
let's be pragmatic. Let's be pragmatic. What are the chances of the GST Council agreeing to extend the period of compensation versus the inclusion of touchy, items like alcohol or petrol and fuel, etc.? It seems more likely that they'll be happy to extend the
so
period.
I think, Tamanna, I think clearly alcohol will be out because that requires constitutional amendment.
Yes.
So that is out of question. I think as far as petroleum products are concerned, my expectation is that very soon we could see 1 or 2 products coming into the GST regime, if not all 5. And as far as the rate rationalization is concerned, I think they can trim down a lot of these exemptions. They can trim down a lot of these exemptions which are in 12% rate to go to a higher 18% rate, and then in a nutshell ensure that the state revenue is increased. If the state revenue is increased automatically by revenue augmentation, then what will happen is that there will not be a lot of hue and cry. And I completely understand that if the projected revenue for the states and the expenditure are not as projected, they are not, the actual numbers are not today as projected, they will whether it's a BJP ruled state or whether it is not a BJP ruled state, they would want to meet the needs of their state related expenditure, and hence this relevant question occurs every time. But I pragmatically feel that there may be an extension for 1 year or possibly 18 months.
Okay, Mr. Shah, let me come to the rate rationalization recommendations, which now reportedly are being accepted, etc. What does this mean in terms of actual outcome? There has been always this conversation of eventually collapsing this to a simpler system, not 4 to 5 rates with exemptions, etc., or add-ons, but make it simpler going forward. Now, 5 years after GST, are we closer to that goal or further away than ever?
You're asking me, Tamanna?
Yes, Mr. Shah, that question's for you, sir.
Okay. No, look, the undisputed goal of GST was to reduce the number of rates to the minimum. As a tax administrator, as a former tax administrator, and from the SSC's point of view, ultimately a single rate will be the best. But let's again be practical. A single rate is a non-starter. I think it's a mirage. It's not going to happen at all. What we're going to have is a large corpus of goods in a medium rate, which is going to be 14-15%, with outlets on either side of goods beneath the 14-15 rate, and some things which are in the 28 rate. Now, that is the ultimate dream of GST. Will it happen now? No, it is not going to happen now. What is going to happen is that we are going to have rationalization, which means moving some goods from the 5 and 12 towards 18, like Abhishek has mentioned, in the hope that it will increase revenue. Even removing exemptions will be a major step towards rationalization. Every time we remove exemptions and we move the commodities amongst rates, we should not forget the consequential inverted duty structure, which may occur, which means the entire chain has to be examined so that we don't end up creating a large amount of credit which cannot be utilized, where again issues of refund, etc. start cropping in. Therefore, this is an exercise which needs to be done with great care. I'm sure the fitment committee will recommend accordingly and move the goods towards ultimately a scheme where the number of slabs are reduced. It's not going to happen so soon. It's going to take time. All these are going to be political calls rather than economics calls. It is not economics. It is politics which will be at play now. Like, for instance, compensation cess also will be a political call. It will not be economics.
And that's exactly the point. It will be a political call, and the fact of the matter is that political considerations and the economic state of all of these, different states and different constituents of the GST Council does also determine what's happening. That is why, Mr. Rastogi, right now, look at the context of when the GST Council meet is being held. The COVID impact is still being borne out, especially by states. You have this all-around inflation breathing down everybody's neck, and the states are seeing a possible dampening of demand, etc., even though the GST revenue collection numbers have been decent. In that context, what do you think is going to come out of this rate rationalization exercise?
See, I think rate rationalization, Tamanna, is a very sensitive issue, because now what we are talking about is predominantly those exemptions. Now, if I can talk about a couple of examples to explain it further, we have filed writ petitions for educational institutes, which are today exempt. But there is a lot of tax cascading which happens because all of these input tax costs become a cost to them. They are not able to offset these. Now, if you move education institutes from exempt to 5%, there will be no revenue augmentation which will happen. Similarly, books, these are globally exempt today. These textbooks and these books, a lot of these books are globally exempt. So if you tax books at 5%, there will again be no revenue collection which will happen, because today paper is taxable, ink is taxable, printing is taxable, and plethora of other job work activities are also taxable. So what would you achieve from that? There could be certain products which are essential for lower income group. The moment you tax that, there will be a lot of hue and cry with respect to taxation on those products. So I think trimming down these exemptions is very sensitive. It needs to be done with pure arithmetic calculations for the sector, so that the revenue is enhanced and there is no burden, or we are not going against the global norms. That must happen. But I think what is easier to do is to rationalize the rate between 12 and 18%. We know for a fact that, tomorrow we need to rationalize these rates, have lesser number of rates, possibly 5 could go to 8 or 6, and 12 and 18 could merge to either 16 or go to even 18. I think that must happen rather than, so this is my personal opinion, that rather than touching a lot of these exemptions, which may not result in enhanced revenue collection, I think the agenda must be to harmonize these rates between 12 and 18 and possibly increase the 5% rate to a little higher rate, not extend this compensation. Any cess apart from these taxes is not good for any economy. That must not happen. So that must be the last resort which must happen. So that's the issue. Similarly, certain items which we know for a fact today can result in a lot of revenue. For example, casino or gaming. We need to be very mindful that whether we need to tax them at 28% or 18%. And what happens if you tax online gaming at 28%? Because these can be physically operated from outside of India. So will you be killing the business, and will you be leading a situation wherein the businesses move outside of India? Must be the thought which must be taken into consideration while implementation. Casinos, we know for a fact, are physically present in the country, either on the land or the sea, but they will continue to pay tax because the physical presence is there. But the moment you tax online gaming at 28%, the repercussions would be different. So I think today, after 5 years of GST, we have reached the stage wherein these sensitivities will arise for these residual products which are taxed at a lower rate or are predominantly exempted. So I think we need to be very, very careful while taking the decision.
All right, so a lot to look forward for on this GST meet. We'll have the outcome tomorrow, and we'll be back here to discuss with you what it actually means for business, for consumers, and for the entire ecosystem. Thank you so much, Mr. Shah and Mr. Rastogi, for joining us today.
Thank you.